I've been looking forward to doing this message about servant leadership for quite a while now. Looking forward to it is probably not exactly the right word, but just really anticipatory about wanting to share this work and research with many of you who are in caregiving professions and who are struggling with the expectations of being everything for everyone. And what this really rubs up against is this gendered or feminization of servant leadership and the ways in which expectations of serving others is really reinforced in a unhealthy way by expectations of female self-sacrifice. And so you have these two mutually reinforcing constructs of the self-sacrificial woman and expectations of pouring out yourself for others before acknowledging your own needs. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit so that we can understand some of the specific elements of what I call the shadow side of servant leadership, and then also illustrate the ways in which those are gendered or feminized or made more pronounced in the experiences of women leaders. So the first element is that servant leadership can promote unhealthy perfectionism and overfunctioning. This often happens when you have a high performer, a high achiever, or an overfunctioning person in a family system or a professional system, and that continues to be internalized by the leader. I'm using women here specifically as then needing to perform at a higher level to fulfill all those needs. And the construct of perfectionism builds in. That's reinforced oftentimes by the conditioning that women experience throughout their lives of that perfectionism. So again, it reinforces each other within this servant leadership construct and the notion of the sort of idealized or perfect woman. Next, the shadow side of servant leadership prioritizes people-pleasing over self-worth. Very similar to perfectionism here, in particular in the lives of women. This idea of being conditioned to please others, to fulfill the needs of others before oneself really feeds into this unhealthy aspect of servant leadership. Third, penalizes those who have healthy boundaries. So the women that I work with in a coaching capacity and also with my doctoral research on clergy women, those who exhibit really healthy boundaries, who perhaps resist this over expectation of pouring out of yourself for others at the cost of yourself, and then instead have healthy boundaries, are actually penalized within this sort of system of feminized servant leadership. Those who are self-differentiated, who are able to say, no, this is an expectation that I'm not willing to fulfill at this point, are really penalized, and that leads to I think continual bullying or targeting within these situations. So the woman who has more self-differentiation and boundaries receives even more isolation and targeting in her circumstances. Servant leadership can lead to intense overwhelm and the feeling that you're never good enough. Again, this also builds into conditioning that women experience throughout their lives of if they do not fulfill the needs of others, that they are somehow not good enough, or that is a site of self-value or a product of self-value to be able to serve others. And that can really build into an unhealthy level of overwhelm and really can have some life-threatening impacts, both physical health and mental health. Servant leadership can build the myth of invincibility, where a woman leader is going to try to overcome or endure these hardships of overwhelm in order to prove her competency and value within a professional system or a family system. And this, again, can lead to really dangerous outcomes, where if someone is availing themselves to others in an unhealthy way to the extent that her needs are no longer being seen or valued, this can lead to disastrous results. I'm talking suicidal ideation, perhaps even actual suicide, the feeling that people can threaten this woman in ways that she will simply endure because she's trying to prove her worth in this whatever system she is a part of. So very dangerous myth of invincibility. Excuse me, I'm losing my words. Servant leadership also reinforces patriarchal narratives of female martyrdom and self-sacrifice. I think that's pretty self-explanatory based on that previous sharing of invincibility, sort of female martyrdom being this idealized image of a woman enduring all this suffering and hardship because she has this higher calling or cause that she's wanting to promote and will endure all of this, in many ways, psychological abuse. This leads to my next one, that servant leadership can override experiences of psychological abuse. I also call this sacrificial embrace. The idea that if you feel that your work has this higher purpose and calling, that self-talk will cause one to override or minimize experiences of psychological abuse, saying sort of, this is what it costs to fulfill this work is important to me, and then overall accepting that abuse. Servant leadership can glorify suffering and glorifies suffering as leading with purpose. Again, similar to female martyrdom. It promotes humility and agreeableness over voice and agency. This is a big one for women as well, the conditioning of being sort of this humble servant and agreeableness and just sort of taking it on. One of the participants in my research described this as taking on others' emotional labor, doing the work that others should be doing on their own emotional landscape. And if people are projecting their emotions onto someone, in particular a female leader, that she is agreeable and absorbs that is very much a byproduct of this shadow side of servant leadership. Another here is silently absorbing others' emotional projection, which I just mentioned. This next element, women are often hired to clean up other people's mistakes. This happens very much in this servant leadership construct. This is also called the glass cliff, where women are disproportionately hired to precarious leadership positions. That means that these are positions in which the leader in some ways is set up to fail, where there is internal conflict that has not been expressed or dealt with. There are previous toxic or narcissistic leaders prior to the hiring of this female leader. And she's expected to sort of deal with that mess, is very much a shadow side of this servant leadership model. The last couple I'll do really quickly. It can normalize systemic bullying, targeting, and blame, as well as scapegoating and executive derailment, because if that servant leader does not then fulfill these notions of servant leadership, perhaps has healthy boundaries around them, she's seen as not cooperating with the narrative. And lastly, it removes opportunities for accountability and mutual responsibility, meaning that the brunt of blame is often taken by the servant leader, and this prevents others from taking on accountability and shared responsibility. So if those resonate with you, I invite you to explore it further. This is an important part of my research and coaching work, and would be happy to work with anyone who's interested in unpacking these in your own life. And it's something that is in many ways a bit of a controversial concept, because the transition from sort of heroic male-centered leadership to a more servant leadership model is seen as a positive, and in many ways can be. But when we look at that in this other lens of the gendered expectations of female self-sacrifice and the ways in which servant leadership disproportionately affects women leaders in a negative way, we can really understand some of these important nuances.